Hi, and welcome back to Who Moved My Career. I'm your host, Nicole McNamara. Super pumped today to be joined by Adunola Adeshola. So lovely to see you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
So happy to be here.
You guys, we have such a cool person on the podcast today. Adinola is a career strategist. She's a Forbes contributor. She's all over the place on LinkedIn. She owns and founded her own company called Employee Redefined. Such an interesting story. I can't wait to get into it with you. Thanks so much for being here.
Yes, I'm excited to talk about all the things.
Just so everyone knows, like, the backstory, every time we get a guest on the podcast, we always do a, kind of meet and greet and, make sure we're aligned in our messaging and everything. And my conversation with Adinola was one of those ones where we were like, how long do we have for this podcast? Because we were very aligned. As you can also tell, we didn't even talk about the fact that she is wearing my signature color. We are aligned
Yeah.
immediately. So I'm super excited for the conversation today. One of the reasons I reached out to Adinola was obviously we're on Instagram at Who Moved My Career, and I started following your Instagram channel a long time ago because, it's kind of an interesting environment. I don't find that social media in general is particularly helpful for folks in transition as senior executives. Like, that doesn't seem to be a place to hang out in. But you kind of nailed the constant reminder of your life doesn't have to be the way it is today. Your career doesn't have to be the way it is today. And if you go on Adinola's website, you'll see that, and I love it. We didn't talk about this before, but one of the things you talk about in your homepage is you tell a story about how you were, a high performing employee. You had a great job. On paper, everyone was like, wow, you're so lucky and it's so great. But, Sunday scaries were a real thing for you. So let's start a little bit understanding about, what brings you to this moment, Adinola. What's your career been to this point? And then we'll get into all the good stuff that you do for others.
Yes. I just love how you just said my whole life and make it so easy for me.
I
But
try.
to your point, I was a high performing employee. I truly believe that if I just followed all the rules, did what I was supposed to do, that my career would just fall in my lap. Like everything would just work out. Like you get the degree, you get the good job, and no one really talks about what happens after that good job. And so I found myself in that place where I did all of those things. I got the good job, and I wasn't happy after a while, and I think there's not a lot of conversation about how you grow and how you in growing sometimes outgrow the things that you really did once desire. And I think that was a lot of what happened in my case where I ended up feeling really lost. I felt really lost in a career that I once really, really wanted. And it was disorienting because what do you do when you got the thing that you wanted and you no longer want it? Does it mean that you're a failure or that you're stuck or what does that mean? And so that was a lot of the questions that I found myself asking. And it really started me on this path of deciding that I could have more. Like just because you got the more you once wanted doesn't mean that you can't have the next more that you desire. And so that was where I found myself. And it led me down this path of being able to help so many more high performers who found themselves in similar situations where it's like, okay, I got it. I got the thing. And now I want something else. And I don't know what that else is. I don't know what else I'm looking for. Or for some people, they do know, but they don't necessarily know how to make that happen. And so that's the work that I get to do today, working with a lot of professionals who find themselves at that juxtaposition of having had the things that they wanted and now wanting something else and wanting to take their careers to the next level, but not necessarily knowing the process or the path to make that happen without losing what they've gained or without sacrificing their peace or their salary or the things that they've worked hard for. So I really enjoy it.
You coined a phrase that I think a lot of people will resonate with, which was uncomfortably happy.
Mm,
And a lot of our listeners are either in transition or I think recently laid off or feeling like that is coming. And I think there's a real difference between when it feels like your career happens to you versus when you feel like your career, when you're in charge of your career a little bit more. What does uncomfortably happy mean in your definition, and how did it like show up for you?
yes, that's such a good question. And I think that it's something that we don't often talk about enough. It's that feeling of have the good salary, or you have, the decent job title, or a lot of the things that make you feel comfortable, but you're not actually happy. Right? Like you're not fulfilled in your career. It's similar to what we often know as the golden handcuffs, where a company provides the right perks or the right benefits or the right flexibility that you feel tied to the lifestyle that it offers, but you don't necessarily feel fulfilled with the things you're doing, how you're contributing, or how you're even showing up, or the environment that you're in, right? And so that was my experience being comfortably unhappy. I was making a good salary. I was in a space where, my friends and my family was like, "You're doing amazing. Like, wow, we love this for you." But deep down, I didn't want to get out of bed in the morning. Like, I'm like, I'm pressing my alarm over and over. It
Using.
like a hassle to like actually show up, and that necessarily isn't how I want it to be. As a high performer, it's like you want to be doing your best. You want to be showing up, doing what you're capable at your highest level. And I just didn't feel that way. And I think when you're comfortably unhappy, especially as a high performer, most people don't really notice because your average day is someone's excellent day, right? So on the outside, it's like you're still doing the best work, but deep down that you're unhappy and that you're not fulfilled. And that's pretty much what that means, comfortably unhappy.
Yeah. I just it really resonated with me because, I think and especially right now, so many people and I mean, I was guilty of this. As a high performer, I got the job that I pined for the better part of 5 years, and then I got it, and it was funny, I was just telling someone this the other day. The day that I received the call that I had been given this job that I had wanted for years, I had 2 reactions. One was short-lived, which was, "Well, this is awesome, and yay, me." And we should go out to dinner tonight. Followed I remember I was at a baseball field. Thank goodness my kids don't play that anymore. It's just the longest game on the planet when your kids are, like, 6. Um, but the second thought I had was like, "Oh god, like, now I have to get out of here." Because to your point about the handcuffs, I knew the handcuffs were on me, and I was really aware of it at the time. And I thought to myself, now have a countdown clock to get out, not in a bad way, right? Like I loved my job, but I was also like, "Ooh, I've also realized that the high performer that got me here has to also get me to the next thing." And I wasn't exactly sure what that next thing was gonna be, and I was even more concerned that that next thing might not be at the company that I was at. So, I was so excited, but it was really coupled with like this, "Uh-oh, like now I've reached the top of the game here, so what's the next top of the game?"
Yeah.
And that is a really hard question to answer in the moment.
It
Do you work with people that struggle with that?
Definitely, I was that person who struggled with that, right? And I think that's part of like the curse of being a high achiever is that you're always thinking about the next thing, right? Like the goalpost is always moving. You're always thinking, okay, now that this is happening, what's going to happen next? What's the next plan before you even kind of settle into what's present in front of you, right? And I think that can be really challenging for us where you can put a lot of pressure on yourself. And honestly, when I'm coaching my clients, one of the things I talk about is how to get rid of the 5-year plan. I think we've seen a lot of life over the last 5 years that's completely different than what we could have imagined 5 years prior, right? And I think that trying to decide what the 5-year version of you will want now is just not a well-informed decision to make because you don't know who you're gonna be in 5 years or what you're gonna want or the state of the economy or the workplace, as we're seeing so many different changes happening right now. And so I do think that it's more important to figure out how do you want to feel in the next year and what part of your career will allow you to have that, or what does your career look like that will allow you to have that, right? Because we can probably more so predict where we want to be by this time next year, opposed to where we want to be by 2032, right? And so being able to really look at it from that lens of like, what's missing right now? What do I need to feel more fulfilled right now? And what steps do I need to take to make that happen will allow you to be a little bit more strategic and realistic in the sense that you're able to just make more choices that align with where you are, opposed to casting out a vision for a person that you have not yet met. And so I think that sometimes helps people make more choices that are that feel progressive opposed to just trying to figure out who the next 5 years will be and how do you make a choice that you'll be happy with for the next 5 years. I mean, things change so fast and we're seeing that in the workplace now with layoffs and reorgs and AI. And so it's just important to not put so much pressure on yourself, but instead to get clear on even just the next year. What does that look like for you? And what steps can you take to at least get one step closer to being more fulfilled in your career?
So I want to push you on the year thing because, there's a difference, I think, between sometimes these things correlate, but sometimes they don't. In the executive marketplace,
Yeah.
a year is like table stakes for finding your next thing,
Yeah.
right? And, if you're an individual contributor, it's a different story. You could be an awesome individual contributor. It's not to say that there is one's better than the other, but I think from an executive standpoint, there are so many people who, look back even just a year ago and they're like, the things that I'm facing now in the job market versus what I thought I was going to face a year ago are so markedly different. It is moving at a pace that I have never experienced before. And, I think too, because of the state of the job market, and I don't know if you have seen this with your clients, but it's just very slow out there. So even, I mean, I look at my experience over a year. I I would have if you talked to me a year ago, and you told me I was gonna be doing a podcast for those in career transition or for, career reinvention, I would have been like, "What are you talking?" Right? So, like, the time horizon thing, I think, is an important benchmark for people to understand, like, depending on what you want and depending on how senior you are, that time can really shift pretty markedly.
Yeah. Well, I guess what I was wanting to express is that sometimes I find that even executives, when they are, because I think you started off saying how sometimes you don't know what that next stage could look like or what you want your next career or your next move to be. And sometimes I find that people put pressure on making sure that that next thing that they want to do or that they decide to do is the thing that they're going to be okay with for the next 5 years, right?
Mm,
Because of that choice, they can find themselves not moving forward because they're like, well, will I be okay with that in the next 5 years? And will I have to be, will I be satisfied with this choice? Right. And what my perspective has been is that sometimes that's a lot of pressure because, like you just mentioned, you never knew that a year ago that you would be doing the podcast, right? And so if you based off starting the podcast as okay, I have to be comfortable with this for the next 5 years, then you might have had some resistance to that, or it might have taken you a little bit more longer to get started. But from what I have learned from you is like you just did it because you saw the need now, right? And you saw that it was important to start. And so that's pretty much where I was going with
mm,
that not letting this idea of I have to be satisfied for the next 5 years keep you from doing what you feel the need is now or what you feel like you're wanting to do now, like allowing the metrics to not be 5 years, but opposed to, will I be okay with this for the next 12 months? Like, will I feel satisfied even just now making that choice, opposed to casting it out and feeling like you have to have a guaranteed role built in for the next
yeah.
5 years?
Yeah. When we did strategic planning at my former company, it was always time boxed for a year because,
Mhm.
like, who knows what you're doing even in 2 years? So I think that when you reframe it like that, I think it absolutely makes sense. I wanna talk about your Forbes column, which if you haven't already looked it up, you are doing yourself a disservice. It was actually after I found you on Instagram and I was following you, I read one thing. I read your first thing that's up there, which is, I think, something that a lot of people are feeling right now in the job market, which is I was awesome at my job. Like, think about what just happened last week, right? We had Target layoffs, we had Amazon layoffs, we had UPS layoffs,
Yes. Oh my goodness.
who were awesome at their jobs.
Yes.
And a layoff has absolutely no correlation to your performance or your worth. It doesn't always feel like that, but that is an actual fact. And so, can we talk a little bit about that title because it was like, you're so good at your job, why aren't you landing your next one?
Yes.
I feel like that's kind of, you can read a lot of things like that on LinkedIn that are kind of clickbaity, and when I read the comments that you wrote and the ideas that you brought to the table, I was like, "That is something I hadn't heard before and resonates deeply, I think, with people who are in this space."
Thank you so much. I mean, I really do try to talk about things that I feel like really will give words and language to high achievers who often don't feel like they're seen as much, right? Because when you're a high achiever and you're doing great work, everyone's like, you're amazing. Just keep trying. Or like they'll tell you, like, like it's the job market, or it's all of these things that don't necessarily feel empowering to you and don't necessarily make you feel like you're in control of what happens next. And so I really do try to create content and put it out there for people who need to kind of hear some real answers. So I'm really glad that that article really resonated. One of the things that I talk about in the article is how, as a high achiever, you're so great at everything that you don't necessarily know what you want to do next. And I think part of that is this is kind of, it happens as being a great employee. When you're a great employee, and a high performer, anyone can come to your desk and put something on your table. And even if you're not 100% sure how to get it done, somehow you make it work and you do it before the deadline, right? And you kind of build that practice in place when you're working in corporate as a high performer because you end up just doing everything and doing everything well. And so when it comes time to actually land a new job, you often don't necessarily even know what you want to do next because you've spent so much of your time doing what everyone wants you to do. And I think that's where a lot of qualified candidates end up feeling frustrated with their job search because they don't necessarily take the time to really think about what do I want to be targeting based off of what I feel most aligned with. Because without that question, you end up just putting yourself out there, throwing your resume out there, even having great conversations with the people you're well connected with. And people don't necessarily know how to place you, right? They might
Mhm.
think, you're amazing, you're awesome, wow, keep you in mind, but they don't necessarily see why they need you for the specific problems that they want to solve, which keeps you in that loop of just getting compliments but not offers. And it really does start with being able to say, what do I want to do next based off of my interests, my expertise, and how next do I want to talk about myself and tell my experience and my story so that people understand that not only do I want this, but I can do this really well, opposed to just being like, here's all the things I've ever done. I hope you see how amazing I am and hire me.
One of the things I see with a lot of high performers is everyone assumes they're always fine
Yeah.
because they have always been fine,
Yeah.
right? You're so strong. You are such a good leader. You have done so much in your career. I see you on LinkedIn, doing all these things. And we talk actually, in our very first episode, we talk about the moment that happens right after you get laid off, when all these people call you, and there's like 3 buckets, right? The first one is, "Oh god, is anyone else getting laid off?" Like the gossip seeker. Another one is like, "I can't take it here anymore. I'm gonna leave now because you're leaving," which is just total nonsense. No, you're not. And then the third one is, "How can I help?" And I find I've struggled with this in my own career. The "how can I help" question is the hardest one to answer.
Yeah.
Because always the one that everybody comes to for
Yeah.
help. So, how could I possibly answer that question accurately or from my heart?
Mm.
And I think you help a lot of people figure out, and I think you have a kind of a process for how to figure out, how do you answer that question? How do you ask for help? Like, so can you walk us through that? Yeah, I think you have like a clarity, confidence, communication framework. I've done my homework appropriately.
I love how you're just like so well informed.
High achiever.
One of I just want to acknowledge what you said. I think that's so real. The vulnerability it requires to tell someone you need help, right? Like to be able to say, I have a need or I I'm not really where I want to be. And that in itself can be really tough, even amongst family, right? Like when you're the person that is the breadwinner or the person who's always doing well or the sibling that everyone can count on, right? And so I think that's a really real mindset conversation because it isn't easy. But on the tactical side of it, I think that we have to switch the narrative that asking for help makes you inferior or expressing your goals makes you inferior. And so this is why I number one recommend getting clear on what your goals are. So even if you do have those initial conversations like you just mentioned, you've just been laid off, people are like, how can I help? I think it's totally fair in those first few days to say, hey, I'm still processing this myself. I would love to revisit this conversation in a few weeks and go from there, right? Because at that point, you probably are just still in shock that this is happening to you, that you don't know what's next, and you haven't given yourself enough time, understandably so, to really figure out what is next. And so I think if you're in that space where you don't know, then it's perfectly fine to have the action step be, let's circle back on this conversation. Because what you don't want to do is just start saying anything and then you come back to the conversation later or you think back on it and you're like, that's not what I want, right? And so it's fine to take that space. But when you are a little bit more clear, you've taken the time to do a little bit more deep diving into what it is this next stage of your career should look like, then you want to go to that conversation and position yourself as like remember that you still have brilliance, right? Like remember that just because your employment status has changed, you still have gifts, you still have talents, you still have a track record of results that you bring with you to your next experience. And that's super important to keep in mind, especially for those moments where you feel a little bit of shame because of your employment status, right? And so remembering that your employment status does not define you or the value you bring is number one important. And then from there, being able to say, here are my goals and here's my value. So for people you might know already, that might look like, as you know, I've been in my industry for the last 12 years. I've had some high level positions, being able to transform the marketing teams and increase the brand awareness of our target audiences. And now I'm really looking for a role that allows me to hone in on X or that allows me to do X or now I'm really looking for a role at a company like Y, right? Like being able to tell your people what you want, but also doing it in a way that reminds them who you are, right? Like you're not just like, I've just been laid off. I'm looking for new opportunities, right? Like that necessarily, you're putting the burden on them to figure out how to help you. But the more clear you are on what you want and the more clear you are on what you've done, the easier it could be. Because sometimes we assume that because we have close proximity with someone that they know exactly what we do. And while they might know you're amazing, they might not be the best at being able to explain that to the next person. And so by giving them that clarity on what it is that you've done, what it is that you want to be known for, and then letting them know, here are my goals. This is what I want to do. I like this role at this type of company. You don't necessarily, when you do that the right way, you don't necessarily even have to ask people to help. They'll just remember you because you were that specific, right? They hear of something like the company you mentioned, or they hear of a role like what you said that you're looking for, and you'll automatically come to mind because you were that clear that you remember. So that's the way that I recommend it, and it does help a lot when you're like, I don't want to be begging for help. I don't want to be asking people to, help me when I'm the one who can usually help people. Just start with your goals and your value, and you'll be memorable enough that other people want to help you without you having to beg.
Can we transition a little bit into the realities of the job market today? And from where you sit, what are the changes that you've seen? What are the tactics that you think people are not paying attention to? Is there any kind of, I learned something, I think I told you about this the other day, the white lettering on resumes. I was like, that is something I'd never heard of before, but wild. Just like in terms of right now, because, a lot of our listeners reach out to me after episodes that we share, and they're like, I hear you and I want to do that. And everything that I have been taught my whole life is not working. And one of the things you said on your website, which I thought was so interesting and goes against the grain a little bit from kind of conventional advice, is you're not going to tell people to go outside and go network, network, network. So tell us a little bit about right now in the market and what you're seeing and how you think people can stand out.
Yes. So I do think that the market is tough. And it's so interesting to me because when we say tough, we also hear that from both the employer side and the candidate side. So I always think that's interesting where one person is saying it's tough while the employer is also saying it's tough. And I think that means that there's just a disconnect in how the hiring process is right now. But I also think that part of it is that there are so many people looking for a new job who have never had to really look for a new job. And what I mean by that is that a lot of the clients that I even work with find themselves frustrated with their job market because they never even had to be in the job market. Maybe they got their last few roles from referrals or past employees and moved somewhere else or random recruiters reaching out to them at just the perfect time. And so they never really had to try to get hired elsewhere. And I think that that's happening for so many more people than we imagine that a lot of people are going into the job market as top employees, but very average candidates because they don't necessarily know what they need to be doing or have the job search skills to put themselves out there. And I always say that the skills that are required to get the job are completely different than the skills that are required to be great in the job. And what that looks like is being able to market your skill set, being able to advocate for yourself, being able to know how to get in front of the right decision makers where you can skip the competition, even if you don't know anyone. And I think that when you're in your job, these are things that you don't necessarily have to do. So by the time you're being thrown into the job market, you're well out of your depth because you haven't had a lot of practice doing those things. And so I think that rather than focusing on a lot of the tactics as far as what keywords to put in your resume and how to get in front of the ATS system and all of these things, one of the things I talk about is how to get in front of real human beings, right? And how to get known and seen and noticed for opportunities that you want. And so one of those ways is there's 3 ways that I teach my clients. Number 1, one of the simplest ways is to have a LinkedIn profile that attracts the right recruiters. 87% of recruiters are looking for top talent. That's not just recruiting firms. This is including internal recruiters at companies who are searching for top talent for the teams that they're wanting to hire for. And so if you can master having a profile that gets seen in the results so that recruiters want to reach out to you for the roles that you have decided that you want, then being able to land interviews in that way can be a lot more simpler than having to throw yourself into the ATS system. One of the problems that people find themselves in with this, most people aren't telling the story for where they want to go next. And so they might find that they have a LinkedIn profile that maybe used to work, but they're getting hits and messages for roles they don't want anymore. But that's a clear sign that you haven't elevated the way you're talking about yourself to position yourself for the roles you do want. And that's a simple fix, right? Knowing how to better talk about what you've done and what you're wanting to do so that the right roles are the right recruiters who are looking for the roles that you now want are finding you instead of the roles that you feel that you don't want to do anymore. And then another way is to get in front of the right decision makers. So just knowing how to bypass the ATS system by getting in the inbox of the hiring managers that you want to work for, the executives that you want to be on the teams of, and being able to let them know how you can solve their problems so that they want to get you in for an interview. A lot of my clients have never even met some of these people, but by doing this, they're able to get the hiring manager to reach out to the recruiter for them and say, "Hey, can you interview this person because they seem like they could be really what we're looking for." And this is one of the ways to circumvent the "I don't know anyone" problem, right? Like when you know how to create a compelling message that people just have to want to learn more about, it really helps you be able to stand out. And then the last one is building authentic connections. So while I don't say network, network, network with everyone, you do want to be intentional and strategic about the connections that you are building. I always say if you don't have a tribe or a network that you can count on, it's not too late to build one. And getting to know people who are in your industry or who are I could say the people who you wouldn't mind having a conversation with in the kitchen of the during lunchtime, like, those are the people that you wanna be connecting with, not the person who, if you get the job, you'll be dodging them, like, once you're walking in the hallway, but the person who you actually wouldn't mind sitting next to during lunch to catch up with, right? Like, building relationships with those people can not only help you get job offers, but it'll help you show up as a thought leader for people because, again, you have value, you have expertise, you have knowledge that people will want to be connected to. And in turn, they will want to help you because they see how valuable you are and they understand your goals because you told them. And it's a great way for you to be able to find out about opportunities that aren't even posted online.
Well, we're very grateful that you gave us some free advice that undoubtedly you charge your clients a lot of money for. So we are grateful for that. And as we kind of wrap up here, Adinola, let me ask, are you comfortably happy now? Are you some other version of those two words? Now that you own your own thing, control your own destiny, help others do the same?
Say I'm a lot more comfortably happy than unhappy. But the high achiever bug is still in me. So I'm always like, what can I be doing more? How can I do more? What's next? So these things that we talked about still doesn't go away when you're a high achiever. But I am much, much more happier and content than that season of my life.
Is there one thing that like one big goal that you have that you're still trying to reach for?
Just loved to be able to reach more high achievers who need this work on a larger scale, and being able to really help so many qualified people who just don't have the knowledge, right? Like you kind of find yourself on this hamster wheel feeling like, is it me? Am I the problem? Am I good enough? And so I think I'm just really, really passionate about creating a platform that allows people to have those answers so that less people find themselves second guessing themselves and more people find themselves creating a career that they truly love. So that's like my I love it. I can go, as you can see, I can go on and on about it.
Well, we're glad that you have found this career and that, there's always something else you could be doing more of. I would like to become a Forbes contributor. And so I think what you're doing is very cool, very awesome. Before we let you go, I'm going to ask maybe a slightly controversial question. How do you define high achiever? Like, have you ever gotten on a call with someone who's like, I'm a high achiever, and then you start talking to them and you're like, are you though? Are you though, really? Because I have to guess that I have met many people, and I have managed a lot of people in my life, and I know some people who have said, "I'm a super high performer and I'm a really high achiever," and then I'm like, "Oh, but their work isn't showing up like that, and you don't think take things to the next level." Your version of high achiever and my version of high achiever are maybe misaligned. Does that ever happen?
Yeah, I can definitely see that being a thing. And I think high achiever is a person who is ambitious and who acts on that ambition. So it's not just someone who wants things for themselves, but who actually has proof that they're going after, that they're making it happen. And I think that if your work ethic doesn't match your goals, then you're likely not necessarily a high achiever. Like essentially, you need to be achieving at a high level. And if you're not doing that, other people's standards and your own, then you're likely not. But I think those of us who are high achievers are the types of people who aren't saying it, right? Because we don't necessarily see ourselves that way. Again, your average day to you is someone else's excellent output that you don't necessarily know, right? And so I think most high achievers think they're not doing enough. Think they I think they downplay their skills. I think they are always moving the goalposts so they don't see how much they've already achieved. And I think if someone is probably saying they're a high achiever, but their work ethic doesn't match, then they're probably not a high achiever.
I also think on some level, high achievers do see each other.
Mhm.
I don't it's like a pheromone, but a corporate pheromone. I do think that they quite often I have been led astray before, but not at a huge degree, and I think what you said about acting on your desires is the differentiator there. I'm glad that you have found something that allows you to help other people kind of work through that and also discover and rediscover maybe their worth.
Yeah.
Because I think anyone, whether this moment is forced upon you or not, sometimes when you have a deep relationship with a company, you let the company define your worth.
Yeah.
And when that rug gets pulled out from underneath you, I think the name of your company even says it, right? Employee Redefined. You have to redefine who you are without that scaffolding.
Absolutely. One of my favorite quotes that always tends to hit home for people is your career was never meant to be your entire identity. And I think part of that work, especially as a high achiever who prides themselves on their purpose and being fulfilled and being doing meaningful things, is to know that your career is just one part of your life and not your entire life, and to cultivate a life that you love that feels just as fulfilling as your career.
Yeah. Well, may we wish all of those things onto our listeners because I don't think there's a single person out there that would not want to do that. The work is in how to get there. And that's why people like Adinola exist and share a lot of her thought leadership in this space for free on Forbes and on Instagram. And if you want to get more involved, how do people get more involved if they're interested, Adinola, and kind of working with you on some of this stuff?
Yes. So if you are wanting to actually work with me, then I recommend going to my website at employeeredefined.com to see how coaching and my program can support you. If you're loving this podcast and want another podcast in your roster, then I highly recommend listening to my podcast, the Level Up Podcast.
Like, love the idea of leveling up, and you have certainly, delivered on that promise today. Adinola, thank you so much for joining us. I have so enjoyed the conversation and so glad I have had the chance to meet you and work a little bit with you and know that that does not end here, and, we would love to have you back at some point as well.
Yes, would love to be back. Just let me know.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thank you as always to our listeners. Do all the things and subscribe and like and all the things I'm undoubtedly forgetting because this is not the part where I high achieve. I'm just glad people are here. So Adunola Adeshola, thank you so much. See you soon. Talk to you later. Bye.